34 years of marriage, and I learned what my wife really thought of me from a stranger in a parking garage. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd left my phone on the seat of our car, the one my wife had taken to drive herself to the Glenwood Springs resort, for what she called a planning lunch with her book club. We were celebrating our anniversary that weekend. The whole family was flying in. My son and his wife were driving up from Denver. My daughter was coming in from Phoenix with the grandkids. I'd booked the resort myself, upgraded to the lakeside suite, ordered her favorite flowers, white peonies, to be waiting in the room. I drove over to grab my phone, figured she hadn't been there long enough to park and get inside. I was right about that. But I was wrong about everything else. The attendant at the garage entrance, older fellow, maybe late 50s, name tag, said Ray, flagged me down before I could pull through. He leaned in close, almost whispering, and said, "You the husband?" "Silver Camry. The woman checked in about 3 minutes ago." I didn't understand why he was asking. I said yes. He looked behind him once, then back at me. "Don't go in yet, and don't use that entrance." He pointed to the side stairwell. "Give it 5 minutes. Go up to level 2, near the elevator. You'll hear something you need to hear." I sat there with my foot on the brake, the engine still running. Something in his voice wasn't casual. It wasn't the voice of a man making conversation. It was the voice of someone who'd made a decision about something and was living with it. I parked. I took the stairwell. What I heard in the next 12 minutes changed the rest of my life. "Her name is Sylvia. We met in the fall of 1990 at a ceramics class. Neither of us wanted to be in. She'd been dragged by her roommate. I'd been talked into it by a co-worker who thought it would help me decompress. I'd spent 15 years building Harwood Technical Services, from a 2-man operation in my garage to a mid-sized engineering firm with contracts across the Mountain West. I was 31, already graying at the temples, and I knew exactly nothing about ceramics. She was 28 and threw a perfect bowl on her first try. I married her 14 months later. We built everything together. The house in Lakewood, the business which she helped manage through the lean years when we almost lost it twice, once in the early 90s, once after the 2008 collapse. She knew the books as well as I did. She knew which clients were reliable and which ones would leave us holding invoices for 6 months. She sat across from me at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning more times than I can count, and we built something real. We also had 2 kids, buried 1 parent each. Survived a health scare of mine in 2017 that I still don't like talking about. There had been distance. There had been years where we weren't as close as we should have been. I know my share of that. I worked too much. I wasn't always present in the way a husband should be. But I never, not once, thought she wanted me gone. I was at the far end of level 2 when I heard her voice. She was standing near a concrete pillar about 30 feet from the elevator, phone pressed to her ear. I couldn't see her clearly from where I stood, but I could hear every word. The garage was quiet. Her voice carried. "He doesn't know anything," she said. "He's too busy playing Grandfather of the Year." A pause. "I know what I said before, but this weekend is the window. The whole family is there. Everyone's distracted, and I need to talk to you about the accounts before the anniversary transfer goes through." Another pause, longer. "Because once he puts my name back on those accounts, it gets complicated. We need it done before then, not after." I pressed my back against the wall. I want to tell you I was thinking clearly. I wasn't. My first thought, genuinely, was that I'd misheard her. My second thought was that there had to be a context I was missing, some explanation that would make this something other than what it sounded like. My third thought was that I was 63 years old, and I just heard my wife use the phrase, "before the anniversary transfer goes through," while standing alone in a parking garage talking to someone I didn't know about accounts I thought we shared. She kept talking. "He thinks the whole thing is a surprise party he's planning. That's what I told him to keep him focused there this weekend. Leonard already knows the timeline." I didn't know anyone named Leonard. Just tell him we move on Monday. That's all I need you to say." She hung up. I heard her heels on the concrete, moving toward the elevator. I waited until the doors had closed before I moved. I went back to my car. I sat in it for a long time. Then I called my son. My son is 30 years old. He works in finance, which I used to think was just a coincidence of his interests, but standing in that parking garage, I was suddenly very grateful for. I told him what I'd heard, word for word, as calmly as I could. There was a long silence on his end. Then he said, "Dad, what accounts?" I explained. When Sylvia and I had restructured the business 3 years ago, I had stepped back from day-to-day operations, brought in a managing director. We'd also restructured our joint finances. It was supposed to be temporary. She had asked to be removed from 2 of the operating accounts while we sorted out some liability questions. I'd agreed I'd planned to restore her access this month, a gesture for our anniversary. I'd had papers drawn up. My son was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who's Leonard?" I didn't know, but we were going to find out. I want to be careful here about what I say and don't say. I'm not a man who believes in jumping to conclusions. I spent 34 years in an industry where the difference between a correct assumption and a wrong one could cost you a building or a life. I was trained to verify before I acted, so I did not confront my wife that night. I did not cancel the party. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. What I did was call my daughter. She's always been sharper than people give her credit for. She flew in from Phoenix the next morning as planned, and she brought her husband, who is a CPA. We met for coffee before anyone else arrived at the resort. I told them what I'd heard. I watched my daughter's face do something I'd never seen it do before. Close down, very slowly, like she was putting shutters over windows. She said, "Dad, how long has Mom been having lunch with her college friend on the first Thursday of every month?" I didn't know she'd been doing that. "About 18 months, she said. "I thought it was just a social thing. I never asked." Her husband, quietly, calmly, asked if he could look at the business restructuring documents. I had copies in the safe in my room. He sat with them for 2 hours. He came out and said, "There's nothing wrong yet. But if someone with power of attorney moved against these accounts on Monday, while you were still in a celebratory frame of mind and hadn't reviewed anything in weeks, you'd have a significant exposure." How significant? He said a number. I sat with that number for a moment. Then I asked him what I needed to do. Leonard, it turned out, was not hard to find. My son found him by end of day. He was a financial advisor out of Boulder. Not licensed in Colorado anymore, his license had been suspended 18 months ago in a matter that was still working through arbitration. He specialized apparently in what my son described as asset repositioning for high-conflict divorces. That phrase sat in my chest like a stone. I hadn't been told we were in a high-conflict divorce. I hadn't been told we were in any divorce. We were, as far as I had understood that morning, celebrating our anniversary with our children and grandchildren at a lake resort in the mountains. I had personally selected the wine pairing for the dinner. I went for a walk by the lake that afternoon while the rest of the family was settling in. It was October, and the aspens had turned, and the water was so still it looked like glass. I stood there for a while. I thought about the ceramics class. I thought about the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I thought about sitting in the hospital in 2017, waiting to hear whether the mass on my pancreas was what we feared it was, and how Sylvia had held my hand so hard she left marks on my fingers, and how when the doctor came in with good news she had put her face against my shoulder and shaken without making any sound. I thought about how much of a life 34 years actually is. And then I thought about the phrase, "He doesn't know anything." I went back inside. What I did next, I did calmly. I want that on record because people always assume that when a man finds out something like this, he explodes. He confronts. He makes a scene. I didn't. That's not who I am, and honestly, it wasn't what the situation called for. I called the attorney who had drawn up the anniversary transfer papers and told him to put everything on hold. He didn't ask why. He said, "Understood." My daughter's husband quietly prepared a document that summarized the financial exposure and what would be needed to properly protect the operating accounts. We spent 2 hours on it that evening while my grandkids were swimming in the resort pool, and Sylvia was downstairs having a glass of wine with my son's wife, who didn't know any of this. I also bought a small digital recorder. There's a pharmacy 10 minutes from the resort. I drove there myself, paid cash, was back before dinner. I kept it in the breast pocket of my jacket for the rest of the weekend. The anniversary dinner was on Saturday night. My wife gave a toast. She talked about 34 years and what it meant to build something with someone. She talked about the early days of Harwood Technical. She talked about my health scare. And her voice caught when she did. She is a good actress, or perhaps that part was real. I still don't know. She talked about our grandchildren. She looked at me across the table with those eyes I've known for 3.5 decades, and she said she couldn't imagine her life without me in it. I smiled. I raised my glass. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I asked if we could sit on the balcony for a while, just the two of us. She said yes. She seemed happy, a little tired, relaxed. I asked her quietly how her planning lunch had gone on Thursday. She said it was fine, just logistics for the weekend. I nodded. I asked her if Leonard had confirmed the timeline. The silence that followed was the longest I've ever sat in, longer than the hospital, longer than waiting on a bid, longer than any silence I can remember. She said, "What did you say?" I didn't repeat it. I just looked at her. She tried 3 different versions of a response. None of them were the truth, and we both knew it. After the third one, she stopped. She looked out at the lake. The water was dark and still. Eventually, she said, "How long have you known?" I told her since Thursday. She asked if I'd told the kids. I said only what they needed to know to protect themselves. Another long silence. She said, "I was going to tell you after the weekend." I didn't say anything to that. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. "I was scared. The business, the accounts. I didn't feel like I had any security. I didn't feel like I had anything in my own name." I thought about that for a moment. I thought about whether it was true. I thought about how a fear like that, real or not, could have been talked about at a kitchen table, could have been brought to me directly, could have been resolved in an afternoon with our accountant. I said, "You could have asked me." She didn't answer that. I went inside and slept in the sitting room that night. In the morning, before my son and daughter woke up, I went down to the lobby and called my attorney again. I told him I needed a different kind of paperwork than what we'd been discussing. The drive back from Glenwood Springs took 3 hours. I did it alone. Sylvia had made arrangements to stay an extra night with her sister, who'd driven in when everything became clear to the family. I didn't try to stop her. I had 3 hours with the mountains and the highway and the radio, and I'll tell you the honest thing about that drive, it wasn't all anger. Some of it was grief, the kind that's clean and uncomplicated and just hurts. I thought about things I'd done wrong. I thought about the years I was too far inside the business to really see her. I'm not interested in making myself a perfect man in this story. I wasn't a perfect husband. But what I had not done, not once, not ever, was plan something in secret that would have left her financially exposed and uninformed while she was busy celebrating what she thought was a loving marriage. There's a difference. I think most people who've been in a long marriage understand what that difference feels like. The divorce was finalized the following spring. It was not easy. It was not clean. There were months of lawyers and documents and uncomfortable dinners with the kids where everyone tried to be normal and nobody was. My son handled it like a professional, which I think was his way of coping. My daughter cried in my kitchen one Sunday afternoon and said, "I just don't understand what she was so afraid of." And I didn't have a good answer for her, and I still don't. Leonard lost the remaining piece of his arbitration case that December. I don't know if that was related to what had happened. I didn't pursue it. I kept the house in Lakewood. Harwood Technical is still running. I brought in a second managing director last year, which means I actually get to take Sundays off now, something I hadn't done with any consistency since 1994. My grandkids came to visit in July. We went fishing at a reservoir about 40 minutes from the house. My granddaughter, who is 7, caught a small trout and immediately wanted to put it back. I said that was a fine choice. We sat on the bank for another hour, and she told me about her teacher and her friends and a book she was reading about a girl who lives in a lighthouse. I didn't think about any of it. The divorce, the garage, the weekend at the resort. I was just there on the bank in the sun with a kid who wanted to put the fish back. That's the thing no one tells you about getting older. The calendar doesn't care how your year went. October comes back whether you want it to or not, and the aspens turn whether you're watching or not, and the lake goes still in the evening regardless. I'm 63 years old. I built something with my hands, and I protected it when I had to, and I still get Sundays now. I think that's enough. I've thought a lot about Ray since that October afternoon. A parking attendant I'd never met, who had no obligation to say a word to me, who made a quiet decision in about 3 seconds that changed the entire direction of my life. He didn't know me. He didn't know Sylvia. He just saw something that didn't sit right and chose to speak up anyway. That's a kind of integrity most people never get tested on, because it would have been so easy, so completely costless, for him to say nothing and wave me through. I think about the chain of events that follows from a single honest act. Ray speaks up. I stop. I hear what I hear. I call my son. My son finds Leonard. My daughter's husband opens the documents. Every step that came after, the recorder, the attorney, the conversation on the balcony, it all traces back to one man doing the right thing for no reason except that it was right. And I think about what traces back from my own choices. I was not a perfect husband. I've said that and I mean it. I spent years so deep in Harwood Technical that I treated presence in the house as a substitute for presence in the marriage. I was there physically and somewhere else entirely. That's a real failure, and the divorce didn't erase it. What I had to sit with during those 3 hours driving back down from the mountains alone was the question of whether I had created conditions that made Sylvia feel like she had no recourse except to work around me. I don't think fear justifies what she did, but I do think fear explains some of it. And that distinction between explaining and excusing is something I had to work out slowly over months, because grief and anger will collapse that distinction if you let them. What I'm proud of is that I didn't let them. I didn't blow up the anniversary weekend. I didn't take it out on my kids. I didn't do anything that would have made me someone I didn't recognize. When I sat across from Sylvia on that balcony and asked about Leonard, I did it calmly, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I'd learned a long time ago, building a business, managing people, working through the 2008 years with nothing but discipline and clear thinking, that the moments when you feel the most like exploding are exactly the moments when you cannot afford to. That's not coldness. That's the kind of steadiness you have to build in yourself over decades, the way you build anything worth keeping. Slowly, with attention, through a lot of failures along the way. I'm 63. I have a granddaughter who wanted to put a trout back in a reservoir because she didn't want it to be scared. I have a son who showed up for me without being asked. I have a company that's still standing after 30+ years. I have Sundays now. The thing I want anyone to take from this, if there's anything worth taking, is that your life doesn't have to end when someone else's decision tries to end it for you. What you do in the quiet moments, the ones where no one is watching, the ones where you could justify making a mess and no one would blame you, that's what you actually are. Ray knew that. I'd like to think I know it too. I'm still learning. I expect I will be for a while yet.